Hi guys, Luetin here. Huge caveat before I start this video. My upcoming opinions are based off the existing live version of the game, not the experimental dev branch. I wanted to look at it from this perspective first, as I feel we really should have seen some updates to the live title so far, not just in the dev branch. I'll be taking a look at that dev branch in the next video. Stranded Deep is another survival game where your primary focus is on keeping yourself alive. After a plane crash, you find yourself dropped among a series of small islands. You can scavenge resources to survive. Seem familiar? That's because it is. So many of these games have come out, yet so few have managed to do justice to what really is a great game concept. Why haven't they? Well, mainly due to lack of endgame or even any sense of purpose beyond your immediate survival. DayZ, Rust, The Forest, all of these titles spring to mind as recent survival games, but that seem to run out of steam in terms of further development quite early on. Even DayZ, with its huge cult following, I don't really rate myself because its tasks beyond personal survival and then just being a dick to other people seem to run out pretty quickly. Now, Stranded Deep, on the other hand, was a game that I saw to have great potential and still do, mainly because it was focusing on a single-player perspective, not multiplayer, although depressingly they do list multiplayer as something they want to look at in the future. I hope it doesn't become the primary thing. I never covered this game before when it first came to early access, but I did pick it up at the time and gave it some playtime. I thought it looked amazing and was very enjoyable. As with most early access games though, I like to give them a bit of time to move forward and flesh out before I really get into them. RimWorld is a great example of this. In its early iterations, it was nowhere near as full a game as it is right now. The same can be said for many indie games that I often see at other events in their early days. Stranded Deep came out January 23rd, 2015 on Early Access with Steam. It's now the end of September and the game has had about 8 months of development behind it. So what has changed and how much more of a game is it now? Frustratingly, not very much has changed. The game focus remains on keeping yourself alive, but right now it's still sparse on many things. The game has so much potential, it is unreal, and yet it feels right now as if it's taking baby steps rather than leaps forward, which is frustrating. It also really contributes to the argument of early access games being sold at anything other than a token price to assist in their development. Right now, the game is available for purchase at £10.99 or $14.99. It also has the standard clear disclaimer noting that this early access game is not complete and may or may not change any further. If you are not excited to play this game in its current state, then you should wait to see if the game progresses further in its development. Well, that's great if you don't want to wait years for the game to move forward. Stranded Deep sales are meant to be around 500,000 currently, not poor to say the least. Now, this is all well and good, except when you consider alternative games not in the same genre, but just from a kind of price perspective. Now, think about City Skylines, an amazing game with hundreds of hours of content. It's being sold for £23 or $30 on Steam, double the price, but about 100 times the amount of content. I often find that I can pretty much reach the limit of the current content in SD in 3 to 4 hours. So my question would be, is Stranded Deep or indeed many other games in early access being sold at a fair price, especially when they feature a disclaimer saying no further development may even take place? Now, an obvious point to be heard is that ultimately the choice is yours if you want to spend out for it or not. No one's forcing you to buy it. But personally, I don't think games which may or may not develop further should even be allowed to be sold on Steam. The developer surely is in a position to state, I am developing this game further or not. If they can't do that, I don't think there's a place for it on Steam. There are plenty of games whose early development takes place outside of Steam and only moves there when the game is in an acceptable, more completed state. Examples of things like RimWorld or Big Pharma. Both of these kind of indie titles outside, which ultimately have or will move to Steam, but are right now, still developing. RimWorld's being developed, Big Pharma's, it's kind of out. If there's a chance the game won't even be finished, then sell it for a token price to aid in its development. But if the developer is committed to completing the game, then allow it to sell for full price, but with a clearly defined roadmap. Anyway, rant over on early access. Let's talk about the game, because despite all I just said, this game has great potential. And the main reason I feel frustrated is that even within the experimental branch, for 8 months there seems to have been pretty slow progress. I like to think that people keep buying into these sandbox survival games because we are all waiting for one of them to actually do something with the concept that makes it an enjoyable experience with a real purpose and goal beyond just your immediate survival. And after that you make up the story or just go around trolling people. Stranded Deep has a real opportunity to do this. Being marooned gives you a genuine objective, ultimately, to be rescued. Other survival games tend to box you into the map with no clear goal. SD throws you into a world where you're trapped by water and your obvious first thought is, how do I get out of here? By island hopping you can continue to move on, but you also need to continue your survival, which is much easier when you're stationary. I think this creates content but also limits you. It would surely be better to have a more limited area and an ultimate goal than just endless survival. What if, for example, they added in a speeded up aging process to go with its speeded up day and night cycle? So instead of living on just forever in survival, you have a limited amount of time before something bad may happen to you, maybe malnutrition, something physical. Although, malnutrition is unlikely with all the easily gathered food on offer, but, maybe they could do something there. There should also be, some kind of goal though, maybe different ways to play, that if you explore other islands and play it in an exploratory way, you can eventually find materials to create some sort of SOS sign to the air, or maybe you can gather enough food and materials to make it out to sea in the hope of being picked up. There was talk of adding generators to the game. Why couldn't you eventually scavenge materials to work a radio or some other tool to help you escape? Maybe you have to fashion vines or something so you can climb up and light a big fire on top of some rocks somewhere or something along these lines, so that would allow you to escape. Or maybe you even find after a long journey moving around islands, a larger island but with a small community that then would allow you to escape using their radios or something. If you wanted to go really abstract, maybe there is some sort of facility you can find in a kind of like Lost style, where you find bunkers, some science lab that's been long since abandoned. Maybe it could be a bit dark, some kind of thing went on there. It could have all the hallmarks of a really epic game. Right now though, you're stuck in that endless basic survival cycle, which after a few hours becomes tedious. You can craft buildings and tools, but with no real purpose. You occasionally encounter rain, but there is no penalty for being out in the rain. You don't get cold during the night. These mechanics would give some purpose to both shelter and fire. One of the biggest things you really would want to see is your physical energy. This is a critical factor in survival situations, in that you're limited in what you can do based around how much food you have, food and water. When you start to run low on food, you in then turn can't search for food so effectively, so it's a vicious cycle. You're more tired, you can't do things so well. Many things in the game could be ramped up in terms of survival difficulty. This would make it feel more tense, and your survival would become a true challenge. That would become like a core feature. Sharks and dangerous animals are another feature that are already there, but they have very limited impact. A shark encounter can be survived easily, which seems a little bit silly. The chance of infection after any kind of injury like this would be very high in these conditions, so unless you had a ready supply of antibiotics, which you can find in the game by scavenging wrecks, you should succumb to the effects of that infection, like fever and sickness, fairly quickly. It should really be game over. Higher pain effects could be another limiting factor. If you suffer even a small injury or sickness, like a sea urchin or something like this, pain should limit how well you can do other basic tasks and activities. When crafting, it's right now impossible to not succeed. I think it would be better that when you're crafting, especially early on, you maybe fail sometimes based on a percentage chance. This would make the early development harder, more realistic and more stressful, instead of being right now a pretty easy task of just collecting items. Another problem is navigation. Depending on which island you land on first means you'll likely have to leave to find some more materials and bring them back to your base island, especially if you're scavenging wrecks. If you are playing a stationary style of play, that is. If you're playing the kind of island hopping, then it's a bit different. The reason navigating though is so hard is that despite the islands looking different, in reality on the horizon they all appear as a standard placeholder. This is hugely problematic because if you get disorientated, it can be very hard to find your original island again. There are workarounds to this. Finding a compass, if you are lucky, can make this easier, or when you land with your raft on the next island, be sure to then 180 and orientate yourself so you know to return back on a direct course to the home island. Still, right now it's frustrating and disorientating, and certainly best to only make a trip to one island and then back again rather than hopping around 2 to 3 times before you can return. You can harvest plenty of food from surrounding fish and crabs, but despite being able to kill things like stingrays and sharks, you can't butcher them for any useful purpose, and it feels like, if you're going to take the trouble to do that, it should reward you. Also, right now, fish you can kill, they can be stored, they won't rot, and in these temperatures that would be an issue. Within like 24-48 hours, these fish are not really going to be, consumable in the temperatures. So that's something that, again, I would encourage the stresses of your time spent on different tasks there. But again, anybody that knows about survival things, you can store food in different ways and enable to kind of keep it cool, how you put it in the ground. There's different ways you can get around that. It'd be cool to see some kind of innovative things there that you can think of. When we look at other mechanical elements right now, the physics, as with many of these games, seems a little bit crazy. As long as you're careful, it's generally fine, but occasionally supplies will just explode randomly all over the place. Trying to bring back objects from an island in your raft is a great example. It's almost impossible. Maybe this was by design, but it seems more like a failure of physics. The devs are apparently working as well on things like biomes, among other things, in the experimental branch. A rework on the ocean dynamic, building changes, terrain being pre-designed and procedural, as well as other things like Snake's character design. All of these are great, and on the roadmap, their Trello page, they list plenty of other cool things that sound exciting, such as features that are in progress: multi-story buildings, flotsam and jetsam building materials, that's kind of like tarpaulins and stuff, better raft creation, temperature effects, large feature ideas, skinning, so skinning of animals, skills trees, farming, tides, animations and audio changes, achievements, co-op, multiplayer, which I kind of wish wasn't going to be a thing. It kind of defeats the purpose, and please don't go down that route. Story, which is very needed, and biomes. General ideas: night sky improvements, water vines, harvestable driftwood, fresh saltwater pools, inventory bags, fishing rods, rock harvesting, permanent death, compass waypoints, watch 24-hour change, shader quality improvement, water droplets, buckets and rain, duct tape and lashings, shark AI being better, coconut buoys you can make to mark shipwrecks or caves, items with random durability, a parkour climbing system, which seems a little bit sort of its day, but okay, watch skins to unlock. Environment ideas: underwater volcanoes, clams, cave systems, island biomes again, sea forts, abandoned islands with buildings on them, cargo shipwrecks, lost shipping containers, and algae biomes like a green ocean floor. And then some creature ideas: jellyfish, wild boars, new types of crab, sea and land snakes, different types of birds, squids, different fish species all over the place. Item ideas: anti-venom medicine, generator that you could build from scavenged materials, torches made from sticks and lashings together to just light up basic torch, sails made from rafts from palm fronds, an oxyacetylene torch. That seems a kind of insane thing to add, but it's on their list. Military supplies, tools like a pickaxe and a spear gun. Spear gun's actually pretty easy to make in these conditions, I say, having never done it, but apparently if you can find a bit of rubber or plastic, all you really need is a stick and another sharpened stick, and you can kind of fashion some sort of spear gun there. It's important to note there that these things are being considered are in progress with no date for inclusion, and they may or may not appear at all. Now, it's great to have these ideas, this ideas board for brainstorming, but for me, really, until there is an established overall goal, it all feels like a bit of a moot point. With any survival game, for me, the problem is just boredom. There needs to be some overarching task to build towards, because even if you're doing like a repetitive thing, you need to know that it's actually going towards something. Unlike being genuinely stranded on a desert island, you're not playing for your life, you're playing for enjoyment. And if you run out of things to do, or if it just becomes repetitive, you're going to tune out. I think if the devs could clearly define what they envision for the end game, it would be much easier to get on board with all the other things. Still, even with that being said, being on board at nearly a year in development, how far have things come in the experimental branch of Stranded Deep? I'll take a look at that, guys, next time. So please tell me your thoughts about Stranded Deep and early access development in the comments below, and join me next time as I try to survive in more island marooned survival situations. See you then.